Thank
This
you to
conference will now be recorded.
thank you to any of you who have participated in this online poll. It's something that we get weekly, and you can see here at the bottom at the question, as of this date, has the coronavirus had a noticeable adverse effect on any of the following aspects of your business? And there at the bottom is supply of building materials. And the percent that said yes to a major or minor extent is 72%. That said, it's the people reporting it to a major extent was fairly small, but the trend is a little bit worrisome in that when we started the poll, that combined yes was 54% of respondents, and then the following week it ticked up to 65, and then the week after that we got to 72, and the major effect percentage has increased each time as well. This is geographically localized also, so I've spoken with big groups of builders across the country who are not seeing any issues with supply right now, and some people who have some, I've heard of distributors actually being gluttons for building materials right now because they're kind of overflowing. That is not likely to stay the case. Just from an operations standpoint, that's when the closures of manufacturing plants will hit at some point in the next couple months, like I said. So thinking in terms of global supply chains, because we do import quite a bit of building materials that are used, and here's kind of a state-by-state breakdown of the value of imports to each state on a per housing start basis. But you can see that Georgia ranks third here, and not surprisingly, once you actually sit down and look at the biggest seaports in the country, it turns out that, and I didn't know this, and I love this city, that Savannah's port is fourth largest in the country. So that some of the states on here, Illinois being first, for example, that's got a lot to do with with ship and rail shipments from Canada, Mississippi, Gulf of Mexico, but yeah, Georgia is just behind LA, Long Beach, and New York, actually, in terms of that port size of Savannah. Here's just kind of a breakdown of where we get our building materials that are imported. We import some for the industry. We import some materials, obviously, to a greater extent than others. In 2019, as you can see on the slide, there's $65 billion worth of building materials imported. That's actually, and that's kind of on the conservative side. That excludes a lot of things that actually go into the cost of residential construction, like crude oil and other energy costs. If you include those things, it actually goes up to about 120 billion in imports. But China, Mexico, Canada account for the majority of the imports we get. Not a surprise. China's market share there has actually fallen from 38% to 31% over the last 2 years, mainly due to the tariffs that have been in place. So just to go over some product-specific imports. So this is kind of a breakdown of where we get nails, screws, bolts, any other fastener, and you can see that actually Taiwan and China together make up the majority of those imports. The the reason that China, most people actually, and I thought that China would be a much bigger player here. They they are not, because we actually produce uh, a lot of these products in the U.S. Um, so the actual aggregate amount of nails, screws, they're on tariff lists, like the one that's on China, um, but the effects haven't even really been felt in that market from those tariffs, because we just don't import all that much. Hand tools is kind of a different story. So China has the lion's share of this market. It's especially true for pretty much anything with an electric motor in it. But it does include like pneumatic tools as well. But this is all hand tools, and 60% coming from China. And tools haven't, to my knowledge, haven't been on anyone's shortage list. And I don't think they will be, because I've been to Home Depot many times during this and seen plenty. But like I said, it's geographic. So after this, I really am interested in hearing from you all about your experiences with any disruptions in your supply. This is just wire and cable. We get it from Mexico and China, essentially. This includes wire that are used in electrical systems in homes. It does not include like circuit wire or anything like that. So had to get down to the nitty gritty to kind of put these together. This is the one that I told Rob Dietz a while back, that the first thing that we'd probably hear about there being shortages of would be lighting fixtures. And because I put this list together once President Trump put tariffs on the $200 billion of goods from China, and lighting fixtures were there. So I knew exactly what the share was, and we don't produce a lot of these domestically. So indeed, that turned out to be the case. I kind of got lucky, but whatever makes you look good for your boss. But indeed, we started hearing about that on the West Coast, but I've heard it multiple times, and it's one of only a couple shortages that I've heard of to this point. There's also this resilient flooring category. It's essentially vinyl flooring, but we basically get all of it from China. So I'm just going to go through, kind of pivot away from product specific to country specific, and focus on a few countries just because of where they kind of respectively are in this kind of rolling blackout caused by the pandemic economically. So China, which everyone knows has pretty much been put back online in its entirety. We import 458, close to 500 if you stretch it. So 500 building materials from them, over 20 billion bucks, and you can see what the top goods are. So the things that we get a lot of, the electrical connectors, insulated conductors, wire boxes, junction boxes, count for that too. Flooring, but not a lot of wood flooring. Hand tools. We get a decent number of cooking appliances actually imported from China. And then, like I said, lighting fixtures. And 1.5 billion doesn't sound like a lot, but that's what people pay when they come in. That's not retail. So my guess is margins on lighting fixtures from China are pretty high. So from a country that's basically coming out of it to a country that was in the news a lot, as recently as a couple weeks ago because of how severe the restrictions on everyday life had to be. Italy and then Spain. We don't import a lot from Italy on just a value basis. 1.2 billion, kind of a drop in the bucket. It's about 2% or 1.7% of all building materials that we import. But the number two, as you can see, kitchen cabinets. I actually didn't know that we got lots of kitchen cabinets from them. But we get a lot of ceramic products from Italy. And you can see that Italy is actually our number one foreign source for ceramic, right there with Spain and then China. But the fact that Italy and Spain are such a large player here leads me to think that the ceramic materials over the next couple months could also. I don't think that we'll see total shortages where nothing is on the market, where you literally can't get it. But I think you'll see increased prices because of low supply from Italy and Spain basically having totally shut down for a matter of weeks. And then India is another interesting case. We don't import much in the way of building materials from India, but I put them on here because Modi has locked down that country of 1.3 billion, and their measures have probably been the most draconian out of everyone's. We do get a good amount of iron and steel pipes, tubes, and fittings. So India, Vietnam, China, they're big players, but we do make a lot of that domestically too. So I'm not worried yet about those products. Just have to see what the shortage of raw metals is going to be like in the next month or two. So now, kind of going through that recent price trends of some of these products. Here I've got ready-mix concrete. Sorry, no. So this is kind of a price index for the residential construction industry, inputs to residential construction, not including labor and capital investment. But prices actually ticked down between January and March, and I won't have the April prices till mid-May. But my guess is that they'll probably go down a little bit more. What's interesting here is that at the very end, the very right side, where you see that decline from January to March, I got curious. I kind of wondered how often that happens, given you're going kind of from the winter bear period into the beginning of the building season. And it turns out that it's only happened twice, as far back as 2000, and each time was during a recession. And so this is now on our radar as a recession indicator, which is kind of cool that NAHB has its own. So lumber prices were a big issue. You can see they spiked. The January 2017 is when the price spike started to happen because of the tariffs that were placed on Canadian lumber, originally 28% and then 20%. And so you had this big run up, and then supply got cut for various reasons. And then this historic collapse into 2019. Then it's been relatively stable, except it began the year increasing, and demand has fallen off or fell off in March. So these are weekly prices. Prices in March came down a lot, but they've stabilized over the past 4 weeks or so. And right around that red line is the price when the tariffs were priced into the market. And we're currently right about there. So actually, in historical context, lumber prices aren't terrible. Here's ready-mix concrete. So this, again, this comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, so it's backward looking. So the most recent data I have is from March. I put back data going back to 2018 because it's been kind of an odd couple of years for ready-mix concrete. I don't know if any of you have noticed big price fluctuations, but concrete's like basically increases with inflation every month. It's almost been automatic for 20 years. But the past couple of years have been different. And ready-mix concrete is also something, and concrete products, something that I have heard from one member that they're having issues with their distributor. And just to give an idea of the geographic breakdown, where residential construction is essential, and obviously y'all are an awesome part of the country, and surrounded by states that are keeping building supply stores open, etc. So fortunately, the GDP drop off won't be as big where you are. So moving to the CARES Act and tax policy changes, I will go through these slides much quicker than the building materials ones, because there's some things that everyone pretty much knows at this point. Before I dive into it, our legal team would kill me if I didn't put this tiny little disclaimer on here. Let's just let it fill out. I started with a nice like 3-sentence disclaimer, and then it went to the legal department and was edited by about 8 people. But this is the one that JP Delmore, our tax lobbyist, and I have to include with everything that we do with tax. Just saying that, you know, I am by no means a replacement for an accountant or other official business advisor. This is just for information purposes. So after that boring stuff, we go into tax policy. So some of the CARES Act is targeted to individuals, and even things outside of the CARES Act that the Treasury could just do by itself were targeted specifically to individuals. The first of those was extending the filing deadlines. Then in the CARES Act, we had these recovery rebates, as they were called, but those $1,200 payments, and $500 extra for each kid under 17. And one of my favorite parts of the CARES Act was the penalty-free early withdrawal from retirement accounts provision. So returns and payments due April 15th, 2020, that was the only filing deadline changes that were applicable. I kind of threw that away because they expanded that enormously out into June. So any tax forms or payments that are due through June 15, I believe, can be filed late. But they are only applicable for tax year 2019. And it doesn't apply to taxes that you pay at your state. Obviously, a lot of states have followed suit, but it doesn't apply to payroll taxes or excise taxes. I said relief and subsequent legislation. The payroll tax relief has taken a couple different forms. Applies to forms 1040, 1120, and that list could just keep going and going now that they've expanded it. The recovery rebates is one of the things I think most people already know. Were the $1,200 one-time payments plus the per child for people earning less than, if you're married and file your taxes jointly, less than roughly 200,000. It started phasing out at 150,000. The recovery rebates, in my opinion, were the first of two. I think that we'll see another round of these, and I don't think the next round will be. I wouldn't be surprised if the next round was not income restricted at all, so that they could just send payments to everyone, and then certain people would have to claim it on their taxes. But we shall see. That's definitely a big deal for multifamily owners to help people pay the rent. This penalty-free early retirement withdrawal is just relief from the 10% early withdrawal penalty. You can take out up to $100,000 from qualified retirement accounts, which basically include everything that you can think of as a retirement account. You have a period of 3 years to pay taxes on the income from that distribution, so you're not totally getting the money out for free, but you can recontribute the funds without regard to the caps that people usually have. And also, if you are currently borrowing from your retirement account, those payments can be suspended during this time, as long as it's due to, quote, COVID-19 related reasons, as it says there at the bottom. So then the business focus provisions, the medical and sick leave tax credits have gotten a lot of attention, but even more questions that come our way on medical and sick leave tax credits, just because of how they interact with other provisions of the CARES Act. Employee retention tax credit, same deal there. The payroll tax delay, and that's the major payroll tax relief that I mentioned earlier. They made changes to net operating loss rules that have been in place since tax reform that we weren't huge fans of, and made changes to tax reform provisions that limited the business interest deduction. Although our awesome government affairs team fought for an opt-out for that for real estate, and we got it. So this is a lot of text on one slide, and I apologize, but the medical and sick leave credits, those are 10 days of sick leave that are newly mandated by Congress on all employers. The FMLA law had it for employers of 500 or more. That this took away that floor of number of employees, essentially making everyone do it. In addition to that, sick leave, because like I said, the Family and Medical Leave Act, FMLA, already has a lot of provisions written into it that I bet many of you deal with a lot, but added to that act's reasons for 12 weeks of paid leave are childcare issues. That's that is in addition to obviously having COVID, taking care of somebody with COVID. These are all dependent on the affecting event being related to the pandemic. So to offset the costs, businesses can claim a tax credit that fully offset all wages, including employer-paid health insurance costs, which in our membership are not huge, but it depends. It obviously varies greatly from business to business, and you can get advances for those tax credits if you take them before next filing season. So like the bottom bullet says, Congress added that provision for advance refunds, so that money can be immediately available, because the cash flow crunch is really what's killing people. Sorry, poor choice of wording in a COVID webinar. The employee retention credits sound similar to the payroll protection program loans that the SBA is doing. It's a little bit similar, but doesn't involve the strings of the loans. It definitely involves other strings, but you can get a credit equal to 50% of qualified wages, and that's quarterly. But to be eligible, the operation of your business needs to be suspended to some extent due to orders from a government authority, or there's a revenue test, and if you experience a 50% decline in revenue compared to the same quarter in the prior year, that also makes you eligible here. However, the maximum wages that you can be credited for all quarters put together is 10,000. And that's per employee. And then this payroll tax delay, I just on that just want to emphasize that this is not a payroll tax holiday like the president wanted. These taxes will be owed, but businesses will have 2 years to pay them back, with half due at the end of 2021 and the other half due the year following. And it is for Social Security payroll taxes only. The Medicare payroll tax is not part of this, so this is only deferring the payments of employer payroll tax costs. And the change to the NOL rules that took place during tax reform really crunched a lot of builders, because it got rid of carrybacks of NOLs, and it reduced the amount that you could offset your income to 80%. They did away with those limitations, so you can, for the next couple of years, you can actually take NOLs to offset all of your income. You can also carry back NOLs to as far as 5 years back. And if you're able to carry back your net operating losses to a year before tax reform, that's kind of a sweet perk, for lack of better wording, just because tax rates were significantly higher across the board. So the deductions will be worth more. And that's about all on NOLs. The business interest deduction limits, they capped it at 30% of of EBITDA, basically, in the tax reform. They increased that cap to 50% of EBITDA. But this is not something that our members, and obviously correct me if I'm wrong here, that our members typically are having an issue with. 30% of EBITDA and interest expense is really, really substantial. And two, there's an opt-out for real estate trades and businesses, to where you don't even have to worry about the limitation, but it comes at the cost of not being able to depreciate some things immediately. So that does it for me, and all of my self pontificating. So I'll open it up for questions, and hope and pray that the talk of supply chains and tax policy did not put that many people to sleep.
Thank you, David. I appreciate your time. Everybody's got a chat window in our chat function up in the upper right-hand corner of their screen. So the best way to do is to type in your questions there in the chat window, and we can take a few minutes to take care of those. Or we can assume that David has so thoroughly and completely explained all of it that we just don't have any questions. Oh, there you go. Do you see that question, David? Oh, I think you're muted.
No, I do not.
Okay, so it says, wasn't clear about deferred employer payroll costs.
I assume that's with regards to the payroll taxes that can be deferred. Those payroll costs are 6.2% times whatever the employee is making, up to about $100,000. And those costs that you incur they do not have to be remitted to the Social Security Administration until next year and the year after. The period, and I should have specified this, the period for which this applies is, I believe, March 31st. Anything that you, any payroll tax that you pay between March 31st and December 31st of this year, or if the president declares the national emergency over officially before that, it would be that date, but the sooner of those, either the end of this year. So potentially we're talking about 8 months of payroll taxes that are able to be deferred to the following 2 years.
Can you explain the difference between the PPP loans and the disaster loans?
Yes.
One is good, one is not.
So the PPP loan program comes with a lot of strings, but for those strings, it also comes with potential loan forgiveness. And the loan amounts can be significantly higher in PPP than EIDL grants. The EIDL grant program, or emergency injury loan program, is more of a grant. You can basically take that and write it off. That said, the most recent legislation, Corona 3.5, added money to that, just like they added money to the PPP loan program. But that added money was already earmarked for people in the queue. So they've already busted through all of that. The payroll protection program is specifically designed to kind of do what it says. It's specifically designed to try and keep people at work, and give businesses the money that they need to keep people on payroll, so that there isn't a catastrophic decline in the number of employed persons or people looking for work. That hasn't borne results yet, but I wouldn't expect it to. Obviously, we got the jobless initial claims this morning. It was another 4 million. So that's almost 30 million jobless claims, or about a sixth of the workforce that have filed in the last 6 weeks. But the strings with PPP loans are that you have to use it for rent, mortgage, utilities, or payroll costs. And the issue for a lot of our members, obviously, because so much is done through subcontractors, that 1099 and workers do not count toward your payroll costs, which matters in how big of a loan you can get, et cetera. Your own compensation as the owner, that is counted, but you basically have to self-certify a lot of things when you're at the financial institution that's lending you loans. And I will say that real quick, I, through experience with other HBAs, I have heard members that go to a bank that they're familiar with, a bank that knows them, rather than a mega bank that they don't deal with often. If you can find one of those that's an approved SBA lender, people's odds, at least in residential construction, your odds of getting approved are much higher. But so the catch is that you have to spend 75% of your loan amount on payroll, and that's really just wages, essentially. So not a lot of companies pour 75% of their operations budget into payroll. So it'll raise an interesting question, because if you dip below that level of 75, say you only use 60% of the loan amount for payroll costs, that would decrease the amount of the loan that you're forgiven, that you don't have to pay back by 20%. So that's, believe it or not, that's kind of the short answer. We've done many webinars just on the SBA programs, but that's, unless there are other specific questions that I'm happy to answer. That's as far as I'll go, given this time.
I've got one here, and it might be one that you have to deal with offline. I can get your contact information to this member, but says we are a new corporation, therefore do not have credit scoring under this corporation, and because of that, they were denied a PPP loan. And is there a way around that? And that sounds like something that's going to require a longer answer.
Well, so can you just repeat the middle of that?
They're a new corporation and do not have credit scoring under this new corporation name. So because of that, they were denied a PPP program.
Interesting. If that's in the chat box and you can just type in how long ago that was, I'd be interested. Treasury came out with guidance that was intended to kind of help roadblocks
2
for
days ago.
how long?
2 days ago.
2 days ago. Okay, so that's after the Treasury came out with guidance about a week ago. So yeah, that's a really interesting question, and given the legal disclaimer that's in my tax slides, uh, I am happy to take it offline because I'm sure other people have the same question. But I will find you an answer. If my email, if you didn't catch it, it's a typical NAHB, is dlogan@nahb.org. Yeah, and if you email me that question, I will find out post haste.
Okay. All right. I've given him your email, I give him my email address, so between the two of us, we'll get in touch with him. Has anybody had any discussions over whether or not they think the volume of new unemployment benefits applications has anything to do with the fact that they're giving away an extra $2,400 a month to everybody? I mean, they're basically paying them to stay home.
Yes. Yeah. It's
And I asked that question meaning, are these numbers inflated a little bit and maybe we need to take them with a grain of salt, thinking maybe these are people that wouldn't otherwise necessarily have been needed to apply for unemployment benefits, but given the financial considerations, it was made more sense for them to do it?
yes. So they're actually going to be offsetting. And I haven't forecast this yet, but there will be offsetting forces here. So it's not just an overstatement to say that people were incentivized to come into the program because of that $600 plus up. The other thing you have to think about is actually there's some undercounting, because the way when claims data comes out on Thursdays, that is for regular UI compensation, and so a lot of people will not qualify for regular UI. They'll go through this pandemic unemployment assistance, which is the extra 600. But for a lot of people, that'll be all that it is. But those people won't be counted in claims. So we've been emailing with Department of Labor to kind of figure out how they're going to track that. The worry is, of course, at a macro level, you've got to be concerned about people's willingness to go back to work, and I don't, I wasn't personally a huge fan of the $600 plus up, but they had to do something to help self-employed, and they had this beautiful like optics problem where they had to come up with reasoning and a big number. So they basically found the wages for the median like self-employed person and wanted to have enough money to supplant those wages basically for 50%. And obviously with that come people that are in the lower part of that distribution that you speak of, that getting that 600 is actually making it more profitable to be at home. But the 600, it only lasts through July 31st. And I have a hard time seeing them extend that in the next bill, and we do expect another big bill in the next month sometime. And that does not sound to me like, in conversations with past colleagues on the Hill, something that will be extended. So that's a long-winded way of saying that a lot of people are gonna all of a sudden have $2,400 less in monthly income. At that point, that's a pretty good that's a pretty good stick to come after the carrot. If the carrot led them to home, that's a good stick to get them back to work. But I do think that the labor force participation rate is going to fall and be lower than it would be for a longer time had that provision been left out of the bill. But all the senators are saying go big or go home, and they decided to go big and immediately go home.
Well, it is an election year, so.
Yeah, well, that's and I was on a webinar with Arizona this morning with a bunch of other staffers, and it wasn't that the election year stuff wasn't brought up all that often, but I wanted to remind people that it was an election year, and that's in my opinion, that's how President Trump was persuaded by someone on his staff, probably Mark Meadows actually, to say, all right, I'm done, like playing dictator. I don't mean that meanly, but I'm done playing dictator. States, you take it over, and kind of get this out of the federal space, because the quicker that he can kind of wash his hands of the highly unpopular movement restrictions, I think that's better for him. There are also some vulnerable governors that the president does not like and has made very clear that are up for re-election. And I'm well known for forecasting this stuff right. And I'm pretty convinced that another reason that he gave up his or at least the power that he had kind of invoked was to essentially let like fledgling states keep rolling, poorly. It's hard for me.
Colorado, Michigan.
Yeah. And that's if you're the president and you get your name off it and put the onus on the governors, and they have a good idea of what the state's capable of. If I were a conspiracy theorist, I would say that they would have that definitely has something to do with the timing.
All right, I don't see any other questions coming along. The member that asked the question about the credit scoring for the new company, he's got our email, so I'm sure he'll be emailing you.
Great.
With that. And otherwise, I think we'll call it a wrap, unless anybody jumps in anything here at the very last second. But David, thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you. And actually, can I add something real fast? I meant to say earlier, I had that slide on lumber prices. If you can't tell, tracking commodity prices and building materials prices is a daily part of my job. But every Friday I send out an email with weekly updates on about a dozen different species and dimensions of lumber, framing lumber in particular, although I put structural panel pricing out there as many Fridays as I can. So if you're interested in getting on that list, and it's grown exponentially over the past 3 weeks or so, If you're interested in getting on that list, please feel free to email me or Frank if you're okay with people emailing you and just forwarding those. I'm happy to put you on, and yeah, that's all.
Great, thank you. We appreciate your time, and please pass along our appreciation to all the NAHB staffers. I know you guys have been working overtime here these last few weeks from home and trying to keep tabs on everything for us, so we appreciate it. You guys are looking out for us, and we'll be in touch. I think we might try to get you back for something else here. So.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks again for hanging in there with me on what can be some dry material. Maybe next time I'll have to come up with like a little bit of stand up or something if we have to talk tax. But again, thank you all for having me, and I look forward to any questions I get from you offline, or hopefully one of these days we can actually get together in a gathering of more than 10 people.
Yeah, not in June, but sometime.
That's right. All right.
Thank you, David. So long, everybody.
Bye.